let's move ahead. How did you either find your way to the iPhone, or how did the iPhone find its way to you?
Well, the iPhone had a very circuitous route by itself. I mean, I at that point was running like Mac OS 10, so I ran each of the releases at that point, and we've been working on a tablet project, which has a really odd beginning. It began because Steve hated this guy at Microsoft. That is the actual origin of it. And it wasn't Bill, because he was starting to like Bill by this point. It was Laureen had a friend, so Steve's wife had a friend who was married to a guy who worked at Microsoft. Every time Steve had any social interaction with that guy, he'd come back just pissed off. And I mean, it was not in like Microsoft's, like, you know, it was not good for them that he ever saw him. And he came back one time after seeing this guy, and that guy was talking about how Microsoft had solved computing. They solved like laptop computing, or they were going to do laptop or tablet computing, and they're going to do it with pens. And he just like shoved it in Steve's face the way they were going to like rule the world with their new tablets with their pens. And Steve came in on Monday, and there was a set of expletives, and then it was like, let's show them how it's really done. It's like, the first thing is they're idiots. You don't use a stylus. You know, it's cumbersome. You lose it. You're always like picking it up and putting it down. We're born with 10 styluses. Style I. So like, let's use the ones that we don't have to sell. And so he's like, and this at the time, touch screens were resistive touch.
Yep.
Resistive requires you to sort of deform the screen. You have to push it down. So if you look at it like text and everything looks bad, it's really tiring on your finger. He said, we need to do capacitive touch, and it has to be multi-touch. So we went to the hardware team and basically said, like, go do this. And they started, and the design team started building designs around this idea of multi-touch. And it was pretty interesting. I remember one of the first demos of this. You walked into a room. There's a giant, giant table. There's a projector on the ceiling, and you can, like, you see a photo or something on the table, and you could move your finger around the table, and it would move the photo. It's super cool. It wouldn't fit in, you know, your bathroom, much less your pocket, or your bag at the time, I guess, if you're doing it with a tablet. But the moment you saw that, you knew this was the way to go. Like, that was cool.
So it was pretty quickly you were sold. You thought Steve was right, that stylus wasn't the right way to go. You saw your way forward.
No question. No question. I'd had devices with a stylus, and I hated them. Like a Trio, I mean, there's cool things about it, but like you'd always lose that stylus, and you're always like, you're trying to pull it out, and you're typing, and then you're going back. It was just slow and cumbersome. So that thing was great. Now, how do we get to the iPhone? A few things happened at the same time. Apple was turning from a computer company, in fact, we would call it Apple Computer Inc., to an electronics company, Apple Inc. And I think half of our sales at the time were iPods. So we were turning into this consumer electronics company. We were always looking at what was going to take over the iPod space. Like, was something going to cannibalize music sales and iPod sales? And the one thing that seemed like it might do it would be phones. Everyone was starting to carry phones, and you could try to put music on your phone. Now, you mentioned the rocker earlier. You can do it like that, and then phones would never have taken over anything. And I think that was like Steve had heard, the Razor, and the Razor was thin, and that's all it was. It was thin. Possible to use, but it was thin.
Yeah.
And so he's like, rocker, okay, it's spelled like, R-O-K-R, that's cool spelling. It must be just like the Razor, and it comes, and it's, like this big, and it's ugly, and 100 songs. So anyway, there was a thought that phones might cannibalize sales of iPods, and so we thought about that. But the other thing, I remember I was sitting with Steve at lunch one time, and we were both using our phones, and we both had these phones, and we hated them. And we started talking, and we looked around, like, everyone around us has a phone. And everyone looks very angsty as they're using them. Like, no one, it seems like it's a pleasurable thing to use the phone, but it's a nice thing for communication. Yeah. And Steve said, do you think we could take that demo we're doing with the tablet in multi-touch and shrink it down to something big enough or small enough to fit in your pocket? It'd be a phone size with that same touch technology. So we went back to the design team, and they took and carved out a little corner of it and made this very simple demo. I'm pretty sure it was Boss who did it, and Boss is one of the best. And he made this thing. It was a simple list of names, and you would, with your finger, you would drag along. It probably had the rubber banding and all. I mean, it's magical. You dragged along, and you tap on a name, and it would slide across and reveal the card. So phone number, email. You tap on a phone number, and it would say calling. It wasn't calling, it wasn't doing anything, but it said calling. The second you saw this demo, you knew this was it.
The future.
There was no question. This is the way that a phone had to behave. Yeah. Steve saw it and said, okay, put the tablet on hold. Let's build a phone. Let's build a phone based on multi-touch. Yeah. And that's what we did. So immediately the design team, we all got around and started designing the iPhone based on that technology. And the hardware team had the Herculean task of then shrinking that whole thing down into something that could fit in your pocket.
Yeah. Now, there was this other component of this. Steve famously said in 2005, we're not very good at going through orifices to get to the end user. Do you remember that? This was at All Things D in 2005.
Yeah. This is referring to all the carrier stuff.
Yeah.
The carriers, that was an interesting thing. Now, I have to say, like, I came into this as a platform guy and a design guy, but I knew nothing about phones. Like, I had no right to lead any team doing a phone. I'd never heard of GSM or CDMA before we started the iPhone. In fact, the first text I ever sent was on my iPhone. And because texting on everything else was horrid. And so we started meeting with carriers. We need some solution. So we talked about, do we do an MVNO? Do we license, do we white box a carrier solution through some other carrier? Do we buy spectrum and build out an entire network ourselves? Do we partner with one? And so we started looking at what it would mean to partner, and we'd meet with these carriers, and man, I had no idea. Carriers at some point realized that handset manufacturers were terrible. Terrible at user interface, terrible at consistency, and carriers thought they'd be better than that. And so they would give us these things, hundreds of pages of line items saying, here's all the things your phone has to do. If it's in this category, phone has to do all these things. I would look at it like, there's no way my phone does that. There's no way. And I look at the manual, I'm like, oh my God. If you do like 16 things and you do a jig, you can do multi-way calling.
Yeah.
It was unbelievable. And so we started talking with these carriers, and we said, we know a little thing about user design, user-oriented design. And so here's the deal. You do the network. We will agree that the lowest level of our phone that talks to your network, you can give us a spec for that. Every single thing above that, you have no say. You don't even know what we're doing. Like, we're just going to go do it. You have no say. And, what do you say? And, like, meeting end. We weren't really negotiating on that. And they'd say, like, well, what about this? And we're like, what about, like, no say? Do you not understand? And when Singular came in, and they would send like 4, 5, 6, almost always guys in suits, to explain some of their technology. And when Singular came in, it was one person. It was this woman, Chris Rennie, and she had no slides, and she sat there and she went to the whiteboard and explained stuff, which was phenomenal. I was sold right there. Like, she knew the technology well, and they agreed. They said, okay, you'll decide all the top stuff, and we'll just make sure it works well with our network. And so they signed this deal with us. And
you hadn't demoed for them at that point. They had no idea what you were doing.
we hadn't really started it yet. Like, wouldn't it be fun to build a phone? Let's first have a deal. So no, we didn't show them anything. In fact, they didn't know anything we were doing at all. And I used to like have to kind of enjoy this because their execs would call every once in a while with some brilliant idea, and they'd say like, "We really think email is going to be really big. I think you should put a dedicated button for email on your phone." And I would sit there, and they don't know we're doing text. They don't know we can update things. I'd say like, "Yeah, I don't know if we'll ship with that, but maybe a few months later, we'll add a button." And they're like, "Oh, you're building like a Lego phone." Like, someone can go down to the stores, you come out with new app, like, and they can buy a widget, a little piece of plastic, and they can snap it on, and now it'll go to email. I was like, well, you think what you want to think. And so they had no idea we made this huge deal. So, we're going to announce it January 9th of 2007. December of 2006, we're going through creating the keynote for this. And Steve says, I think that Stan Sigman, the CEO of Singular, and Singular bought AT&T and rebranded itself AT&T, but it was Singular, should be on stage with our announcement. That sounds great. You should probably have some idea what we're announcing the day he comes. I said, yeah, I guess so. We should wait to the last possible moment. So in December, Steve and I board his plane, and we fly out to Las Vegas. So Stan is throwing an all-Singular company meeting in Las Vegas. And so the two of us fly out so I can give this demo, so we can together give this demo. And so I have this metal locked briefcase, and I have 4 phones in it, and we get on Steve's plane, and so Stan is staying at the penthouse suite at the Four Seasons in Las Vegas. And I thought, oh my gosh, like, I don't know if the cell reception is going to be there. I might get there, and it might not be great. And so I'll do demos on Wi-Fi just to make sure. Then I realized, well, Four Seasons charges you for Wi-Fi. So I'm going to get there, and I'm going to spend the first, a few minutes, trying to type in, a name. It's probably going to be Stan's name, because he's in the room, and credit cards. And even when you have a working device, sometimes it doesn't connect right. I thought, this will be bad if it doesn't work. So on Thursday, the day before we go, I called up the Four Seasons. Now, I can't tell them it's Apple, because no one knows where we're going. In fact, we couldn't even give Steve's name when we flew. It was like I was coming with my buddy. And so I called up and I said, I'm an executive at Singular, and our CEO is staying in your penthouse suites, and I need to give a demo of this new Singular device, and so I need to be on Wi-Fi. So can you make sure that in his suite, Wi-Fi is free and open and just automatically connect? And the guy, IT guy said, let me check back. Calls half an hour later and says, we can't do that. He said, the Four Seasons and the Mandalay Bay share a single pay access point for the whole thing, including the Mandalay Bay big, lazy river. If we made it free for his suite, it would be free for the whole thing. And I said, well, it sounds like you found a solution. And there's beat. No, we can't do that. I said, you're the Four Seasons. You have the best service of any hotel in the world, and you're telling me for my CEO who's spending all this money and our whole company is staying there, you can't do this? Beat. Yes, Mr. Forstall, we'll make that happen. So we fly in, and again, we get off the airplane, and Steve gets out first, and I'm walking behind with this locked metal suitcase. And the limo driver sitting on the tarmac and says, Mr. Forstall. And he's like, no, that's Scott. And he's like, come here with me. Mr. Forstall opens the door, and Steve walks around. And I was like, oh, my God, I am so in trouble. And we get to the Four Seasons. We go up, and we walk in, and it's Stan Sigman and Ralph de la Vega, who is now the CEO. And just the two of us, the four of us sitting in there. And Stan, Ralph, you can see, is show us, am I going to get fired for making this deal? And Stan, starts what's the battery life? how well does it connect to the network? And you can just see Ralph's like, please. And then I answered a set of questions, and then he said, okay, let's see a demo. So I open it up, I turn on the first phone, and it instantly connects to Wi-Fi. Not a problem at all. I go through and I give all these demos. They go through the roof. They are so happy. I mean, they're just like, we bet on the right horse, and like, this is the greatest. I mean, they in fact, Stan is a big rodeo guy, and there's like a rodeo that night, and he's like, we bet on the right horse. Come to the rodeo with us tonight. Steve made some excuse, like, I really need to get home. So we left. That's Friday. Okay. Monday, I'm sitting in a meeting, and my phone rings, and I answered it. And it's this IT guy from the Four Seasons. He said, can I please turn charging back on? We have lost tens of thousands of dollars. I said, oh, yeah, sorry, yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. Great service, really appreciate it.
Yeah. That's a good story. Tell me about working with Steve. You were there for a long time.
Yeah, Steve was a unique person on this planet. He was the most intense person I've ever known. I've met a number of world leaders, and I can tell you from experience, having dinner with a world leader is relaxing compared to like lunch on a Tuesday with Steve. He was super driven, very demanding. He forced people to do their best, and there's a lot of this has been told. I want to tell a slightly different story. It's one I've never told before publicly, and he was really compassionate and dedicated to his friends and his relatives. And he saved my life once. And it was when we were deep into Mac OS 10, right before we started the iPhone. And I got sick. This virus went through my kids' school. And everyone at school, a lot of kids at school got sick, and they threw up once, and then they were better. And it hit me a few days later, and I started throwing up. Once every few hours, once an hour, day after day, a little more often. Steve would call every single day. What's going on? How are you doing? What can I do? Then he started coming up with, solutions. You must eat this kind of apple ground up for 20 minutes of this. I mean, like, it was like very specific health solutions for this. Nothing worked. Week passed. Second week passed. I was throwing up every 15 minutes. I lost 5 pounds, then 10 pounds, then 20 pounds, then 30 pounds. I went to the hospital. They couldn't solve it. They finally figured out what it was, and it's a very rare thing where I think the Mayo Clinic had seen 7 cases over like a decade, and most of those people died.
But it was a virus.
Oh, a virus that stops your stomach from working. And just certain people, like, it stops your stomach. So I'm in there, and I'm dying. I'm in the hospital, I'm dying. And Steve calls every single day, asking how things are going. If I couldn't talk, he'd talk to my wife. And at this point, I'm throwing up every 5 minutes. I just want to die. I wanted to die. They gave me every medicine they could that they give to people with cancer treatment to try to stop the nausea. Nothing helped. And I would sit there like holding my finger, like wanting to break it so I could feel pain as opposed to nausea and concentrate on something else. And they put a PICC line in to feed me directly through my superior vena cava because I was disappearing. And one night, about 10 o'clock at night, this is now months into it.
God.
Steve calls up about 10 o'clock at night and he says, I have the best acupuncturist in the world, and I'm going to bring her to you tonight, and she's going to fix you. I'd never done acupuncture. I didn't have any reason to believe it would work or wouldn't work. At this point, I thought if someone comes shake a stick over me,
you're into it.
I'm in.
Yeah.
I had very young kids who just saw their dad disappearing and dying. 2 hours later, so Steve says, like, you're at Stanford Hospital, and I mean, he said, yeah, they're probably not going to love me coming in, bringing this other practitioner into the hospital. So if I get stopped, I'm just going to dedicate a wing. It's nice to have friends like that.
Yeah.
There was one time, a meeting we had at Apple, we were trying to price something, and Steve was arguing for some price, and I was arguing for another one, and he was arguing for this higher price. I said, it's too high. And he's like, no, this is where people are going to pay this. I said, I have friends, I have relatives who have very little money. Like, this is too high. I said, you're a billionaire. You don't understand. And he paused and looked at me and said, I'm a multi-billionaire.
But it worked.
He still went with his price. Okay, so he comes into the hospital about midnight, comes in with his acupuncturist, and he gets through everyone, comes to my office, into my my room, holds my hand, starts talking to me. He's like, she's going to fix it. I'm thrown up while he's there. I mean, it's just awful. And she comes over, and I said, does it matter if I believe this? Because I don't know if I do. I mean, I can try. Do I need to try to believe this is going to work? And she just looked at me and she said, I'm going to manipulate your involuntary system. Doesn't matter what you think. I'm going to fix you. I liked the chutzpah. And she started sticking needles in my head, my back. Nausea went away.
Like, immediately?
It immediately started going away. She was there. They were there hours until sunrise. And for the first time in more than 2 months, I didn't throw up for like 8 hours straight. They left at sunrise, came back a few hours later. She did it again. I never threw up again. I drove. They let me out of the hospital the next day. She came to my house, did it. I got hungry that day. My mom baked fresh bread. I ate for the first time in 2 months. The next day, a nurse came to my house and took out the PICC line. She said it's the fastest in her 27 years of being a nurse she'd ever taken one out. I was 100% dying, and Steve brought this person to me and saved my life. So I will always, always owe him that.
That's amazing. What did the Stanford doctors say?
It's interesting. It actually depended on their age. People right out of med school think they've been taught the entire corpus of medicine, and they didn't believe it. Oh, you just happen to get better at this time. Any doctor over 50 said, there's a lot we don't know, and that worked. Like, empirically, 100% that worked. I can't explain why. I can't tell you if acupuncture works for other things. All I can tell you is I lost 60 pounds, and I threw up I started like this at the beginning of that, and I threw up every 5 minutes and wanted to die, and this person came in, and I clung on to life again.
Yeah, okay. We are close to being out of time. I have a lot of questions.
All right.
Let's go to the questions. Where do you see the future of Siri and other AI going? This sort of gets at what I want to answer.
There's a lot of that. I mean, Siri and other AI. There's Siri. There's the, can you ask something a question? Like when we were doing Siri, I was blown away by it, having had my master's in artificial intelligence. When I saw Siri, I thought, wait, this is supposed to be 20 years from now. Like, I can't believe it's now. And I kind of thought, Google is, if you go to a library and you look up in the card catalog, what reference materials do you have related to this, and then you go and look at every one and figure out if it's right. Siri is you ask a reference librarian and go find the answer to this question. I think that sort of thing is very, very interesting, and the more we can do to have that. Now, if you look at AI, I think there's a lot we can do with AI that we're not doing right now that I hope we get to. I can talk about a few if you want, but
let's go on. How did you react to the news of Steve Jobs passing?
Well, when he was sick, I would go to his house almost every day. That was for years. I mean, he went up and down, and I would sit at his bedside, and we would talk. And some days he couldn't open his eyes. Sometimes I would just be me talking. You know, one of the things when we got Siri right before he passed, and he loved it because he was too weak to type, but he could talk to it. It's odd to say, but I was surprised. It just felt like he would always beat it. Yeah. I mean, before his liver transplant, he was so sick. And yet he would beat it. And he'd always talk about how he's like, I don't need to beat this cancer. I just need to make it to the next lily pad. Yeah. And then there'll be more advances in science. I'll make it to the next one, and more advances. So I was devastated. I mean, I felt so close to him. We spent so much time. I talked to him more than I probably talked to my wife for years. And I talk to my wife a lot.
Yeah.
It was really, really hard.
Yeah.
And it was funny though. See, people don't realize how funny he was. He and I would go to lunch at the cafeteria at Apple all the time, and he would insist on paying. And I was like, it's like, you're paying me enough that I can afford the $8 lunch. But he'd always, like, if he got his food before, he'd wait at the line for me to get up there and he'd pay. And he'd made it so you could pay with your badge. So you'd come up there and you'd badge in, and it would be directly withdrawn from your paycheck. And somehow I was like, why are you, I mean, like, really, like, go sit down. I'll be out there. I feel like an ass while you're sitting there waiting for me, and I'm getting, you know, I feel like I can't get any long cooking food. And he said, no, this is great. I only get paid $1 a year. I don't know who's paying every time I badge.
That's great.
He was a multi-billionaire scamming Apple.
What was the most underappreciated advance of the original iPhone? That's a hard question.
When the original iPhone came out, the reviews didn't get it. The reviews talked about number of clicks. Oh, to send an email, it takes you, 6 taps or something. You have to tap into mail, you have to tap and tap, tap, tap. And so it was being compared against other smartphones at the time, BlackBerry et al., according to the metrics people thought were important at the time. They didn't get it. What they didn't get was we were changing the entire paradigm. We were changing the entire way things were done. And it wasn't about how many taps. It was that someone who would never figure out that BlackBerry because they didn't have a law degree and a law firm that made them carry that CrackBerry around 24/7 would never figure out. And that's what I think people missed. And the sales at the beginning, like, it was nice, but it wasn't what I expected. Because the first time I saw the demo, the first time I saw us, with a working prototype, the first time I used it, I was amazed by it. I was blown away by it. And there's a question you asked at the last panel that, did you think it was going to be super successful? And for me, at some point, about halfway into our development, I thought, we're not using this like a real phone. We use it in the office. We don't use it outside of the office. And it's because we had all these 6 lockdown areas, and, we had the sign that said Fight Club, because, the first rule of Purple is you don't talk about Purple. And I thought, we need to take this out and use it as a real phone. And so I decided I'm going to do it. And I asked Steve just to make sure, and he said, sure, go for it. Give me one, too. And I said, not yet. Because there's all this configuration you had to do, and he wouldn't have, he would have been annoyed at that point. And so one day I slipped an iPhone into my right pocket, I had my flip phone in my left pocket, and I walked out 4 lockdown areas into the parking lot. And I was terrified. Because I was certain, like, this is the day I'm getting mugged on the way home. So I looked around, I went to my car, I drove a different route home. I literally talked to an FBI agent about how you try to be careful and look for people following you. And I got home and I closed all the drapes and doors, and I started using it. and I would use it all the time. But I always had, and only people at work plus Steve had that phone number. And so if it rang, I knew it was someone from work. I'd try to duck into a bathroom. I'd try to duck into, like someone's house, into an empty room. And I'd pull it out and I'd try to use it. And it never felt like work to use it. It always felt amazing. It always felt special. And so I knew this is going to be huge. And so months go on. I'm using it every day. Finally, Steve's like, Scott, I'm the CEO. I get to make these decisions sometimes. You're giving me a phone. And so probably someone in this room set up a phone for him and gave it to him. And then the two of us were the only two people in the world who were carrying phones around, iPhones around. And he'd call me up all the time. I mean, he'd be like, 11 o'clock on a Saturday and be like, I'm at this friend's house, but they're boring, so I'm in the bathroom. And I'm wondering about the touch sensation on photos and the way you pinch. It doesn't seem like it's quite right. And so I'd take mine out, and I'd sit there, and we'd be talking about it. And then he's like, and I think the color of this icon is off by, a little bit. And so we'd sit there, and half an hour later, he'd be like, someone's knocking at the bathroom. They must think I'm really constipated. And he'd hang up, and he'd call me back at 1. But using it in that context, it never felt like work. And I knew this is it. Like, everything's going to behave this way, and this will be successful. And, pricing and other things, there was a challenge to get it to the right business deal for a consumer to get it. But there was no doubt in my mind this was huge.
Yeah. I have a friend who refers to that as Cupertino class software. So this is kind of a trick question, but I have to ask it. Is that the same shirt from WWDC 2012?
That's a great question.
I can't believe it.
And when I find something I like, I buy about 10 of them. This may be that. I have many very, very similar shirts. Would you like to buy one?
So this is kind of repeating the question you just answered, but there's a kicker to it, so I'll ask it again. When the first iPhone reviews started to come in, and some of them were less than favorable, how did you stay positive? And then the next part of the question, how did you resist the urge to contact the reviewers and tell them they were wrong?
Well, Steve probably did that. I think he did.
Yeah.
I was unconcerned by what the reviewers said. I knew I used it. I knew how great it was. It just was irrelevant what they thought, because it was going to be a good product once people started using it.
Yeah. Assuming you're currently using an iPhone, is there ever a time you shake your head at something? If so, what?
That happens all the time. If you're a designer, if you care about design, you can't, go through any part of your life without shaking your head and thinking that could have been done better. And I thought that for our design, even the first version, the second version, you're always making it better.
Yeah. Andy Rubin, creator of the Android, came out with an essential phone a couple of weeks ago. And the question is, are you working on any new tech that you intend to announce soon?
I'm doing a lot of things. I'm doing Broadway. I do a whole set of advising of different startups. I am not currently building something myself along that line.
Yeah. Okay.
As far as you know.
Yes. Yes, well, we'll go with that. What does artificial reality have to do right in terms of design to appeal to you?
Artificial reality? You're saying augmented reality?
It says artificial reality.
Well, that sounds scary. That sounds like Black Mirror.
Yeah.
VR. I think there's VR and AR, so virtual reality, augmented reality. I think augmented reality is very interesting if there's a form factor that makes sense. If there's not, then it won't succeed. But I think the idea of augmented reality, God, it's stuck in my head, is a really, really good one. Again, as long as it doesn't go all Black Mirror on us.
Yeah. There was a period like 5 or 6 years ago, or maybe longer, that skeuomorphic design was super controversial. What do you feel now about?
I had never heard the term skeuomorphism until years after we built the iPhone. And the first time, that's a horrible word, isn't it? Like, it sounds like
I had to look it up.
or morphing something. It sounds unnatural. It just sounds terrible.
Yeah.
When I look at good design, when I look for good design, I look for something which is easy to use, approachable, friendly. You can use it without a manual. It's fun. If you look at the designs we did at Apple, we talked about photo-illustrative designs. We talked about metaphorical designs. And those were infused into the design sense of Apple by Steve Jobs since the original Mac, if not earlier. The original Mac had a desktop and folders that looked very much like the desktop on which that Mac sat.
Yeah.
And so we used these design philosophies. It doesn't mean that we loved every single part of it. It doesn't mean I loved every single part of it. There's definitely things that I was less a fan of than others. But we built these designs that worked. And how do we know they worked? I mean, you just had to watch people use it. I remember when we shipped the original iPad. And within a week or so, I got these 2 emails. And one was from this guy who had a 2-year-old daughter. And he had bought a new iPad, and he'd loaded it up with a set of apps and for her. And then he videoed handing it to her and having her use the iPad for the very first time. This is a 2-year-old. She takes it, and she looks, and she slides to unlock because the UI told her what to do. It animated. It had a little knob. She knew exactly what to do. She slid to unlock. She didn't have to read it. She couldn't read. She went to the home screen. She flipped through a few home screens, tapped an icon. She came up, started playing a game. So a 2-year-old could use it. On the other side of that, the same week, I got an email from this woman who was 99 and a half years old. She said she was in her 100th year. And she was this voracious reader. But about a decade earlier, she got cataracts, and she couldn't read anymore. And she wasn't a candidate for whatever reason for surgery. And even if she got printed books with large text, she couldn't read it. So she, for a decade, hadn't been able to read. She used to love to type on her typewriter, and she'd write limericks. But she had terrible arthritis, and she couldn't type anymore. The day the iPad came out, her family bought her an iPad and loaded it up with books. In that first week, she read 2 novels for the first time in a decade because she could make it big enough and it was bright enough they could get through the cataracts and she could read. Because it was a touch screen, she could type on it, even with her arthritis, because she just had to tap. She didn't have to put pressure on it. So she wrote me this email with this limerick, and the limerick described how this iPad had reconnected her in her 100th year to reading and writing.
That's wonderful.
We knew we were doing something right with the user interface design. The team was amazing. We knew we were doing something right.
Yeah. There are other good questions, but we're running late, so we probably should.
Before you,
okay.
Let me say one last thing.
Yes.
Which is, I mean, I'm sitting here. Earlier, there were 3 people. When I look out here, there are so many people who are the ones who actually the heroes who made this happen. Like, we had this hyper collaborative team of people who dedicated their lives for years to make this product a success. And it's not one person or 4 people. It was hundreds and thousands of people even that made this happen. And so I'd like to applaud everyone here who is a part of it, because you're really the ones who made it possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Good job. Good job. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And I guess do we have any more job for the evening? We're through. So thank you everybody for coming. Can never figure out how to end these. Thank you.